Welcome to the Work Live podcast. I'm Mike Dinatale. The following is a conversation with Rabbi Kelly Levy from Congregation Beth Israel in Austin, Texas. In this conversation, we explore what advice Rabbi Levy would give to people who feel lost in their career, when she knew she wanted to become a rabbi, how to navigate difficult conversations with people who might have different views around work than you do, and much, much more. If you enjoy this conversation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you can support. Without further ado, here is Rabbi Kelly Levy. Rabbi Levy, thank you for joining me today. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think with your background and your experience, you would have a unique perspective on some of the things I want to talk about. So again, thank you for joining me in this conversation today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So I want to start with a survey that I came across by the company PayScale. And they surveyed people across different professions in terms of job satisfaction and in terms of how much meaning different people from different careers found in their job as well. And atop both of those lists were members of clergy. So 98% of members of clergy who responded to the survey said they found their job highly satisfying, and 90% said they found a lot of meaning in their careers as well. So I want to start by asking you, how would you respond to that? Does that resonate with you? Do you find your job satisfying, and do you also find meaning in your work as well?
It's a great question, and I would love to read the survey at some point, because when you work in a field like being clergy, you have a lot on your plate, because a lot of people think we just stand in front of the crowd during a worship service, but there's so much else that goes on behind the scenes. I'm very satisfied in my position because I have the sacred opportunity to be with people at all different moments in their life, from birth to death and everything in between. And there is something truly holy about that work. It's meaningful because I get to be with people in those moments. It's also very hard work, and it can be very exhausting work. We talk about the emotional pendulum swing that happens from a day-to-day basis, where one meeting you're speaking with grieving parents, and then in another meeting you're sitting on the floor with a bunch of preschool students talking about the upcoming holiday. And it can be quite overwhelming and exhausting, but it's enjoyable and it's fun and it's interesting and constantly moving.
What really shocked me about the survey was seeing that there wasn't always a correlation between those two things. Like, for instance, I think, if I remember correctly, a lot of blue-collar jobs, for instance, I remember one in particular, like welding. A lot of welders had a pretty high job satisfaction. I think it was about 74%, but only 30% said there was meaning in their job. Mm-hmm. And so initially, before I really dug into the numbers, I would have thought that if your job was meaningful, you found it satisfying. But the way I conceptualize it is satisfaction comes down to your day-to-day experience, mm-hmm. and meaning probably ties into something bigger, whether you find a deeper purpose or feel like you're contributing to the world in some way. And so for you, what gives you the most meaning about being a rabbi?
There is definitely that distinction, because anybody could be satisfied in accomplishing their goal and accomplishing their tasks. When I have my to-do list every week, and it's grown more and more over the years, being able to finish everything on that list is deeply satisfying. But the meaningful part of it is why I'm doing that and why I'm continuing to come each and every day to work with different people in different parts of their life. It's less about the what and more about the why. So I can understand why there would be a bit of a differential between those two things, and how you might determine the difference between those two descriptions.
Is that something that you had in your mind when you had decided that you wanted to pursue becoming a rabbi?
I think that was a big part of why I wanted to pursue it, because I knew that there was deep meaning behind the work. I think I was a little bit naive and ignorant to think about the amount of other things I would be doing, the sheer amount of emails that I would be responding to, and the behind-the-scenes logistical things that it's not as much fun as sitting with a newborn baby or holding the hand of an ill person. But that stuff is important too. That's the work that helps us and allows us to keep moving and do and participate in those meaningful moments.
At what age or what point in your life did you begin to know that that was a path that you want to take? Was there some moment, or was it just something that came about gradually, or was it something that you decided, you didn't know up until the moment that you decided? When along your journey did you decide and that you were going to go through with being a rabbi, and what was it that called you to that?
It's something that I've thought about for a lot of years because it's almost impossible to pinpoint that exact moment. It was something that grew over time. I was always very active in my congregation growing up. I was that kid at Shabbat services every Friday night, sitting almost front row, ready to participate. I was always at summer camp, Jewish summer camp, every summer of my childhood. It was something that I loved and didn't really think about how it could be a part of my life or actually inform my life until I was in middle school. And then my congregation hired the first female rabbi in our city, and I saw that not only could you love this Judaism, but you could do it every single day. I saw that embodied in an individual that I really could relate to. I had never seen a female rabbi in that capacity, and when I saw her, I realized this was something that I could do one day. And then probably, if I had to pinpoint an exact moment, it was at my bat mitzvah, when I'm standing on the bima and I'm leading the entire congregation in Shabbat services, reading from the Torah. I had this aha moment of, I could be doing this every week, not just once in my life. And there was something significant and special to me in that moment. So I worked from then on towards this goal of becoming a rabbi, and I never really steered off of that path. I was one of the fortunate people to know what I wanted to do early on, and I stuck with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, I've always been kind of envious of people who've had that experience, because even to this point in time, I feel like I'm still trying to figure out how I fit in the world and what it is that I want to pursue. And thinking back to when I was growing up, I think every year from middle school, even from elementary school, there was always a different career that I was potentially interested in pursuing. And then eventually, when I got to the point of picking a major in college, I just went with a very pragmatic choice.
Sure.
Where my skill sets met a good paying career. And I'm curious if in your congregation or just in general working with young people, do you find yourself having those conversations with people who are trying to figure out what they want to pursue, or do they feel lost in some regard?
What they want to be when they grow up one day,
exactly.
Even if they're 55 years old. Yeah. You know, I think for a lot of people, it's sometimes a conversation about if they're finding meaning in the work they're doing. And I think that especially in a congregational setting, we have a lot of people who do very meaningful work. We have a lot of people who work as physicians or in the medical field in some capacity, and they get to literally save lives, and they find a lot of meaning in that work. And the people who don't do that work but are still contributing, it goes back to that same question of what are they doing and why is it important? I think most people within our congregation feel that sense of satisfaction and meaningfulness in the work they do. It's more often that we would have these conversations with some of our younger members, especially those who are in high school, who are starting to think about college and what they want to do and what they want to be when they get out of there. So we have an interesting age range here. We have infants and toddlers, and we have pre-K kids, and we have middle school kids and high school kids, and then we have a bit of a block when it comes to college, because most of those students have left. But they do come back, and they want to have those conversations. So it's not often, but it happens enough that I do get to have some engaging conversations with some of our younger members.
How do you approach trying to advise them on that situation? Like, how do you even, I know it's very subjective in a lot of different ways, but I was curious, if you think back on some conversations you might have had, what is some general advice that you had given some young people who are at that point of trying to figure out what they want to do with their life?
Well, there's a really old rabbinic trick that you can actually utilize in many moments of your life, including parenting, and that's when you always answer a question with a question. So when they come to you and they say, I don't know what to do, the answer is, well, what do you want to do? What is important to you? What would make you feel happy? What would make you feel like you are giving back? And maybe it's not their career that can do that, but it's the volunteer work they can do on the side. Maybe it's the other ways they can engage in the community. So it's trying to help people get to the root of what they're going to do in their life that will make them feel like they have done something significant.
I find myself gravitating more and more towards that point of maybe not needing my day job, what pays the bills, to be the thing that satisfies me. But it's interesting because I think there's a big societal shift happening where younger people, millennials and Gen Z, more and more are asking more out of their work. Whereas growing up, hearing from my parents' and grandparents' generation, work was just where you went to roll up your sleeves.
Yeah, they called it the grind. They called it this thing that you were, what is it, working to live, not living to work, that whole phrase. And, I think that I'm a millennial, my generation, the generations that are coming after us, they want to do something that is giving them a certain level of happiness. It's not just about paying the bills. And one of the benefits of the world we live in is the evolution of how we've given people that opportunity. That wasn't the case for all of the generations that came before us. They were not necessarily given those opportunities. They worked because they had to. They had to provide for their home. They had to provide for their family. And they got oftentimes stuck in a place because it was what was available. But now it's a different world that we live in. It's a more exciting and more varied world.
I grew up Catholic and Christian, and obviously our country is largely a Christian society. And there's this notion of the Protestant work ethic, where work is kind of seen as piety. It's like intrinsically good. And I feel like that's been so ingrained in myself and older generations as well. And so I was curious if Judaism at all talks about the role that work should or is supposed to play in our life. Or even if it's not explicitly stated anywhere in the Hebrew Bible, I was curious, even just in your experience culturally growing up, is there any conversation or what are the general thoughts around how we're supposed to think about work?
It goes all the way back to the very beginning. The very, very beginning of all of our stories in the Christian Bible, in the Jewish Bible, in Tanakh, in the story of Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Torah. The very first book is the book of Genesis. And the story of creation sets the example for all of us. That first 6 days, there was all of this work done, and then on the 7th day, there was complete and total rest. So one of the most important and holiest holidays in our tradition, people often think it's Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. It's actually Shabbat. It happens every single week. And it is a reminder to all of us that yes, you have to work. Yes, you have to tend to an agricultural society to your flock, and you have to, build, and you have all these very physical and manual, very physically demanding jobs that you have to do. But you have to take a break. You have to cease all of that work. Even the people who worked for you. And of course, Torah had slavery. It was an acceptable thing back then. It's 100% not acceptable now. But even your slaves were given a break. Every single person, every human being needs a break. And so it's oftentimes this idea that we have to work so much in order to contribute back. But really, you can't do that work unless you've taken care of yourself, unless you have given yourself the rest. And I think that we get stuck in this cycle, in this routine, and we forget about the importance of taking a minute and resting and rejuvenating ourselves. And we do it every single week.
Does that interpretation of work, is it the same across different denominations of Judaism? Because obviously you're a Reformed Jew. Is it similar across more Orthodox and Hasidic or all the other denominations of Judaism, or is it vary?
The concept of Shabbat is consistently part of Judaism. How we interpret what that work is changes based on which branch of Judaism you're following. So in more progressive branches of Judaism, Shabbat is seen as a time to rest, and you make that determination for yourself what counts as work and what doesn't. So, of course, all of these rabbinic laws were written at a time when electricity didn't exist, and cars didn't exist, and certainly not cell phones, and all of those different things that would take you away from the rest of Shabbat. So as the world has evolved and contemporary society has incorporated the use of technology to much bigger ways, the definition of what is rest has changed a little bit. So in the progressive Jewish world, oftentimes Shabbat rest will look more like maybe you're not answering your emails, maybe you're staying off of your phone, maybe you're not on social media, maybe you're not going to drive to that thing. But it's more of a choice that you're making based on what is important and meaningful for you. In other branches of Judaism, where there's much stronger levels of observance, Shabbat would include not cooking any food. You pre-cook everything in advance of Shabbat. You're not going to turn on lights. You are not going to at all be on your phone or watch TV. You are going to go to Shabbat services and you're going to study Torah, and that is what you're going to do. And there's nothing from the outside world impinging on that Shabbat time.
That dynamic between modernizing old beliefs into like a more modern context, which, as you're saying, in progressive Judaism is kind of the case. You're taking the principles, but you're applying them in the modern world. I'm curious if you've encountered any friction with more conservative or traditional sects of Judaism, given that your beliefs are more progressive and more forward-thinking and more focused on the application in today's world. I'm curious if you've had any friction there. And the reason I ask is because I sense a similar friction in regards to the way millennials and Gen Z are thinking about work, where we're defining what work looks like for us in a modern world with all this different technology that didn't previously exist. And so I'm asking because I find myself hearing boomers and seeing older people in general bemoan how young people are thinking about work. They call us lazy, they say we don't have work ethic, where really I feel like there's just missing context there. It's a different world, and so we're interpreting it differently. So I was curious, how have you navigated, or if you've had any of those conversations and interactions, how have you navigated being respectful but also trying to get these people with these more older views to be more open-minded into the way that you're thinking about things?
Yeah, I would also say that the work that we do today is very different than that of our predecessors and previous generations, because we're never off. We have constant connection to everything, whether it's through phone or text or email. And so the reason that we're redefining work is because it has to be redefined. And that is essentially the essence of progressive Judaism, that our understanding of the way the world works and our understanding of humanity has changed. And so the friction is that progressive Jews, in particular Reform Jews, are looking at the world we live in with a much bigger lens and a much broader approach, which means that we can't look at the way the world worked thousands of years ago and try to reenact that. It doesn't work. And so I think that it comes down to a belief of opinions and belief of interpretation, and that's where there's friction. So it's not that an Orthodox Jew is going to hate me for not practicing Shabbat in the same way that they do. It's that they don't necessarily understand the way that I observe Shabbat. Frankly, as a rabbi, I'm definitely working on Shabbat. This is part of my job. But it means that I have a different approach and perspective of the world, and I understand that for me, driving my car somewhere does not feel like the same amount of work as lighting a fire for cooking. It just doesn't compute for me. We live in a very different world, and I think that the way that these up and coming generations are defining and changing the way we view these work and different types of existences in the world, it's because we've evolved as humans. And so rather than be mad about it or to belittle us, because I work 6 days a week. I'm not lazy. I'm exhausted. And I have 2 small children. It's about learning to understand and to connect on a different level so that you can understand why this definition is changing and why it has to change.
So how would you approach, say you found yourself in a conversation with somebody who had that more old school approach to work, or in a similar case to maybe some progressive views in Judaism? How would you try and connect with someone, find the humanity? How do you approach that conversation, again, where you're respectful, but you're trying to just convey all these points that you were just making?
You go back to that rabbi trick. You answer the question with a question. You ask, what did work look like for you? What were your hours? Because my hours are 24/7. And how I carve out time, and how did you carve out time? How did your partner at home help you with this work? my partner and I share things. My husband we are 50-50, but back for a lot of the people that we might be talking to, it wasn't like that. One partner did all the work at home while the other went to work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. It's about helping people to understand how we've changed, and also to give them firm examples of what my life looks like in the working world versus what theirs might have looked like. Helping to understand that I'm not saying that the way they did it was wrong. Just like I hope they're not thinking that the way I'm doing things is wrong, but that we can understand where each other's coming from. That's the most important foundation of any conversation, being able to understand each other's perspective.
That rings so true for me. I find myself, I think, often avoiding those conversations, and part of the reason I'm asking is selfishly, because I want to get better about having these kinds of conversations. But yeah, I mean, I think it's so true when you look at the way the internet has evolved, the way it's made remote work possible.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not that we don't want to work as much. It just looks different. So yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to that. Just trying to get people to think through their own things. The last thing I wanted to touch on a little bit was work-life balance. As you mentioned, you know, you have a very demanding job. You work 6 days a week. You're also a mother. You have 2 children at home. How do you try and find a balance between having a job that's demanding, but it's also very meaningful, so you love what you do, while also having familial obligations at home with your husband and home duties and your children as well? How do you try and find a good balance between all of those?
I will let you know when I find it. But in all sincerity, it's really about establishing boundaries, which again, think that goes back to that reticence that other generations have felt when it comes to the work that we do, that you don't have boundaries, you just do your job, but you have to have boundaries. When you are constantly in communication and connected to people, if you don't establish a set time to the best of your ability that you're working, then you can get easily pulled into that at every waking moment. If I'm with my family, that is sacred family time. If there's an emergency that I have to deal with, I of course respond. If I am at work and I am in the midst of doing something, I am there and present for that moment. And if there's an emergency with my family, I respond to that in kind. But it's all about establishing those boundaries and determining what those boundaries are from the very beginning. I get 1 day off a week, and so for me, it is important that that is my day off. And I will not say yes to meetings. I will not say yes to extra events unless I absolutely have to. This coming Monday, I have a funeral. I can't say no to that. This is how this works. But for the most part, I try to maintain the sacredness of my day off. It's my Shabbat from the week.
I think that's the fair point, is defining what that very exclusive range of things are that allow you to cross over those boundaries. And that list should be very tight.
It
and then
is.
adhering to it very strictly.
Absolutely.
The last thing I was going to ask is, thinking about the future, you know, you're raising children now. The way we work now and the role that work plays in our life is different from our parents and our grandparents. And now you're raising children, and the rate of change in this world is exponentially changing. So I was curious, what do you hope to impart on your children in terms of what they pursue for work and how they think about their careers and how they navigate that?
Oh, that's such a good question, and it's so hard to think because my oldest is 6
Sure.
and my other kid is 2. It's so funny, though, because my 6-year-old will often say that when she grows up, for her job, she wants to be a mommy. Mm. And it's gratifying to me because it clearly I've done something right in my parenting that's what she wants to do. And then I also think about the fact that when she was in pre-K, her classmates, a group of little 5-year-old girls got together and they created their own cardboard computers, and they sat at a table saying, "Look, I'm mommy." They wanted to say that this is what mommies do. They sit at laptops. And that was also disheartening, though, because I want them to see that the work that we do is more than just sitting at a laptop. So both of those examples of you want to be me, but you also feel like I sit at a laptop all day, it's how they see me. And so my hope is that I can impart on them that it is about doing something that you genuinely care about. I've often said to my kids, whoever you are in the future, the most important thing is that you're kind and that you care for others. And so if you can have a career that allows you to do that as well, all the better. But if you don't, have a career that specifically focuses on that you as an individual will be kind and care for others. That is the most important thing that you do in this world. And we talk about that a lot in my house. So it's maybe less about career and more about who you are as a human being, who you are as a person. And I think at the end of the day, that is more valuable and important than anything else that we do in this world.
Right. And from that, maybe your career flows out of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, great, Rabbi Levy. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Yeah, of course. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's the best way you could support.